This is part 2 or a follow-up to the total cost of ownership for Tesla Model Y in New York City, where we showed a 3-year lease cost over $64,000. If you haven't seen that video, you should watch it because it demonstrates that many people or business owners are shocked when they do the math and they see what they're actually spending to own and operate their vehicle. The link to part 1 is in the description and also right here on the screen. I'm not going to repeat the entire analysis here. You could go watch part 1, but to quickly summarize it, we have a 2026 Tesla Model Y, specifically the long-range all-wheel drive model that's going to be leased for 3 years in New York City. It's a 12,000 mile per year lease, and the vehicle is going to be charged in public and also parked in a parking garage, public parking garage. We did a TCO, or a total cost of ownership analysis, which is an accounting for all expenses getting factual numbers. And it showed the $64,671, which comes out to about $1,800 a month over the 3 years. But the lease payment was only $632. So we got to that in the following manner. Basically, the lease payments were about $23,248. That included rolling the tax into the financing. The operating costs were over $41,000, and so that came up to $64,671, or just under $1.80 per mile. The primary cost drivers in this were parking, number one. So you have a real problem if you need to park in New York City, but it's a factual amount. This owner was looking at $400 a month for a parking garage, but unknown to him until he went to price it, the EV surcharge for keeping a Tesla in that garage was another $100 a month. And then to have charger access was another $50. So he was spending $550 a month to park and have access to charging, which came out to $19,800 over the 36 month of the lease. The second thing that was kind of unique to this city location was fuel, or charging in this case. So charging in the parking lot, or specifically public charging, was about 48 cents per kilowatt hour. This is about 5 times greater than with suburbs of, say, Long Island, where if you had a private home, you could charge overnight in something called time of use, which is currently just over 9 cents per kilowatt hour, so roughly 5 times the price. So we received a couple of questions from this video that we wanted to address. The first thing is, what would the impact be relocating this vehicle to the suburbs of New York City? Specifically, what happens when we eliminate the parking and reduce the price of electricity? And then we made a comment in the last video how obviously driving more costs more in total because you're paying more for maintenance and for charging. But it turns out that it's actually less per mile because the fixed overheads are there and you're only paying the incremental maintenance and charging costs. And so because this application was a rideshare driver, specifically someone driving Uber, they wanted to know what happens when they drive more and the total cost per mile drops. In that case, we do something called a sensitivity analysis, so the driver can determine how much more profit is he going to be making by driving more. Obviously, there are some other factors that come into place here. Because it's a leased vehicle, there's a chance that he may go over the allotted annual consumption. And so we're going to do all that math very simply and see what the facts are. We're going to use the Motriq software to do something called a sensitivity analysis, which allows us to easily vary one or more parameters and instantly see the impact on costs. So for example, we can vary miles driven or price of electricity or lease payment or anything like that and immediately see how it impacts our total cost of ownership in dollars over the 3-year period, as well as the price per mile. Let's jump in and take a look. So we've logged into Motriq and we've chosen our project from last time, Tesla, New York City. And to quickly go back and look, 2026 Tesla, battery electric, 12,000 miles a year, 70% city driving, and all the other values that we put in. To look back quickly, we're at the baseline of $64,671, which is just under $1.80 per mile driven. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of that very large parking fee. And in the last video, we described how we put that in as a $6,600 per year recurring annual fee. So we're going to set that back to 0 and go back and look at the total cost of ownership. And what you can see here is the dramatic drop. So our total cost of ownership is now $44,871 over the entire 3-year period, or just under $1.25 per mile, compared to before with parking, which was $64,671 for the total cost of ownership, or just under $1.80 per mile. So to answer the question, the first part of getting the car out of the city and into the suburbs saves $19,800 over the 3 years, which comes out to 55 cents per mile. So let's now move on to the next question, which is how much does the price of electricity affect the total cost of ownership? To do that, we're going to use a tool called sensitivity analysis. In sensitivity analysis, we simply vary one parameter and see what the effect is on the other. So in this case, you could see the bottom axis, we're varying the electricity rate. And as we vary that, we're going to see what its effect is on the total cost of ownership. In this case, you can see the electricity rate varies from 9 cents a kilowatt hour all the way up to 48 cents a kilowatt hour, and we adjust that at the top. And the results that we're plotting are the total cost of ownership. So let's see what those numbers actually are. If I mouse over the first data point, we can see the electricity is at 9 cents per kilowatt hour, and the total cost of ownership is $41,082. If I just jump to the other end of the chart, we can see that electricity is 48 cents per kilowatt hour on the horizontal axis, and the total cost of ownership, again, over the 3 years, is $44,871. Now let's see what that is per mile. So we can change the result of the chart from total cost of ownership over the time period to the cost per mile. You see the chart's axes have changed a bit. Going down to the lower end, we can see with electricity at 9 cents per kilowatt hour, the cost of operating this vehicle is just over $1.14 per mile. And if we look at the high rate of electricity of 48 cents per kilowatt hour, we can see the cost of operating this vehicle is just under $1.25. So let's recap what we did here. We varied the price of electricity from 9 cents per kilowatt hour to 48 cents per kilowatt hour. And we did that because a viewer asked what would be the impact on operating this vehicle outside of New York City, for example, in the suburbs of Long Island. So we looked at electric rates, and in the suburbs of Nassau and Suffolk County, an average homeowner would pay a time of use rate, which is typically associated with charging electric vehicles and comes into effect at 7 o'clock at night. So typical overnight charging for an EV on Long Island would be 9 cents per kilowatt hour, as opposed to 48 cents per kilowatt hour inside New York City. And we see the result of that is a savings of $3,789 over the 3 years of the lease in New York City, again driving 12,000 miles a year. That translates to 11 cents per mile. Now we're going to address the last question. We made a comment in the previous video saying that driving more actually costs less on a per mile basis. Obviously, charging and maintenance is going to cost more the more you drive, but the lease payment is fixed. A viewer question was, what happens when we start exceeding the amount of miles allowed in the lease and the excess mileage fee starts kicking in? If you recall in the first video, we had 12,000 miles on the lease and 25 cents per mile, and that's what we built the model on. Let's again go to the sensitivity analysis, and we'll see how easy it is to simply vary the mileage driven and see what the impact on the total cost of ownership will be. So we're back in the Motriq tool, and remember how sensitivity analysis works. We vary one variable, in this case, annual mileage, and the tool automatically calculates what will be on the other axis, the result, in this case, total cost of ownership. We've set up the sensitivity analysis to vary the miles driven per year from 6,000 miles to 36,000 miles. And we're keeping everything else in the lease and otherwise the same. The system will automatically calculate the additional charging, the additional maintenance, and at the point that you're exceeding the allotted mileage in the lease, the additional costs associated with excess mileage will kick in. Let's start off by just mousing over this point over here. You can see this is 12,000 miles a year, which is as we have done the previous analysis. You may recall that that number was $44,871 as the total cost of ownership over 3 years for driving 12,000 miles. Now let's see what happens if we reduce it to 6,000 miles. The prices drop to $42,539. Not a lot, because the only savings in this case was electricity and maintenance, which is very low on an EV. Now let's look at the other extreme. Look how the graph goes up. As mileage increases from 6 to 12 to 18, 24, 30, and 36. Let's go all the way up here. Driving 36,000 miles per year will result in a total cost of ownership of $72,196. That sure is a lot of money. However, recall we made the claim last time that while the total cost in dollars over 3 years will increase, the price per mile driven will actually decrease. And if you are a vehicle operator in a fleet, or use it in this case for rideshare, driving more miles will cost you more in dollars, but will cost you less per mile. So if you're making more money, you could be saving more money. Let's go up here to total cost of ownership and change this to calculate cost per mile. You can see how the graph has changed. In this case, as the mileage increases on the horizontal axis, the cost per mile decreases. Again, our baseline before, you can refer back, is just under $1.25 per mile at 12,000 miles per year. Let's cut that miles driven in half to 6,000 miles. The price per mile goes up quite a bit to $2.36. You'll recall before, the total cost of ownership in dollars over the 3 years had a relatively minor decrease. In this case, the price per mile increases dramatically because you're still paying the same for the lease, you're still paying the same for insurance. All you've done is save a small amount of charging and maintenance, but the lion's share of the costs are still there. Let's go from 12,000 miles to 36,000 miles per year. So remember, we're incredibly over mileage. We've dropped to almost half. We're now at 66, almost 67 cents per mile. So let's recap what we have here. We started off with a 12,000 mile per year lease with a 25 cent per mile overage fee, and we did not exceed that mileage. We then modeled the same vehicle on the same lease terms, driving significantly over mileage at 36,000 miles per year. And we came up with the obvious conclusion on the total cost. Going way over mileage costs a lot more money. That's no surprise. In this case, $27,000 more. But as we suggested in the prior video, even though the total dollar amount goes up, the dollar per mile to operate the vehicle actually goes down. In this case, it's about a 40% reduction, close to half, from $1.25 per mile driven to 67 cents per mile driven. And again, that's a total cost. That's the total cost to operate the vehicle. So while going over mileage on a lease for personal use obviously makes no sense, if you run a business and you're increasing your revenue by using the asset more, your incremental costs for driving the vehicle actually decrease. And if you can maintain the same price per mile, in this case, the person is driving Uber in New York City, which varies between $4 and $7 per mile. Driving this vehicle over the allotted mileage actually makes more money. If you need some help with analysis like this, feel free to reach out to us at Spectivate. We help make decisions based on facts, not feelings, using software and consulting services. Our software tools and our people, if you need them also, evaluate product performance, finances, fuels, energy, and environmental impact, and let the facts fall where they may. We're independent, we're unbiased, and we're not motivated by what you buy, or even if you buy at all. So if you're a fleet or a finance or an ESG leader, or perhaps someone developing policy for a municipality, and you need some help with EV or diesel or propane or gas or something else, whether subsidized by grants or paid out of your budget, we'd be happy to speak with you.